Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and we always enjoy having Teresa. Appreciate her support of Warbirds in Review, and the support of Warbirds in Review would not be possible without Jim Hagedorn, Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, and a lot of our other sponsors. So the paid political announcements are not coming, but the sponsorship recognition, we have to do that. Again, the Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, Ron and Diane Fagen, who generously donated this beautiful Quonset hut, gives us a production room, a green room, allows us to produce these programs while Sleeping Dog Productions Company puts this together for us. This is an airplane here. If those of you who thought, there's people yelling at me. Yeah, okay. Well, what, Hagedorn, are you going to come on stage now? This is... Okay, I said there's Jim Hagedorn harassing me over here in the corner. We can do this. In his flight suit, he brought his Mustang in this morning. He'll be on here and be doing the talking tomorrow afternoon with Bud Anderson. This Mustang right here belongs to Ron Fagen, the Fagen Fighters World War II Museum from Granite Falls, Minnesota. If you came this morning thinking you were going to see a mosquito, yes, we realize this is not a mosquito. The mosquito had a little bit of an issue with the weather and a small mechanical problem. They are on the way right now. So we have regrouped, which putting this puzzle together of Warbirds in Review takes a little bit of shuffling on occasions. The mosquito, pass the word, will be here on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock in Warbirds in Review. So last night I'm saying, well, what am I going to do? We have to do something on tomorrow morning because this is our very first presentation. Bud Anderson was having dinner with us. He said, well, I have a slideshow. If you want me to show up tomorrow morning, I'll be glad to do that. So we're... So this morning we are going to be very, very much entertained and privileged to have Bud Anderson not only today, but then he'll be here for his normal presentation tomorrow afternoon. Ron Fagen brought his beautiful airplane in, so it's great to have friends and all these people have these beautiful airplanes that you can enjoy. Without further ado, again, thank you to all of the owners of the airplanes and the support people who make this possible. And now we will roll the video that introduces Colonel Bud Anderson, and then he will come out to show you one of his slideshows of some of his activities over the many years of a great career. So, the video.
In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, and by 1938, controlled most of China. During those same years, Hitler was building his war machine. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland. By 1941, Germany controlled Denmark and Norway, Belgium and Luxembourg, the Netherlands and France, Yugoslavia and Greece, and then invaded Russia. In 1940, the incredible British fought off the Germans in the air, the Battle of Britain. For many Americans then, the mood was to stay neutral, stay out of foreign wars. Of course, that was not to be. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan, and 3 days later, on Germany and Italy. Over the next 4 years, our country was transformed militarily, economically, and in the most human terms describable. It was the most widespread war in history. It's estimated that at least 75 million people died. By 1944, more than 2.5 million men and women were serving in the Army Air Corps. Over the course of the war, some 40,000 American airmen died. 18,000 went missing. 41,000 were captured. These numbers seem incomprehensible today. We and our allies in combat and at home paid huge personal prices to save the free world from oppression. Our veteran guest aviator this afternoon is a retired Air Force colonel. He flew Mustangs with the 357th Fighter Group out of Leiston, England, nicknamed the Oxford Boys. He was a major at age 22, flying 2 tours, logging 116 missions over Europe. He was a triple ace with 16 1/4 air victories and is currently the ranking American living ace of World War II. After the war, he continued his career as a test pilot. His last assignment was commanding a tactical fighter wing in Vietnam.
Good morning, folks. Sorry about the change of plans, but fortunately, Colonel Anderson and his son and Ron over here volunteered to fill in for it. We'll have the other show this Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for the Mosquito. We got Colonel Anderson on my left, Colonel Anderson on my further left, and Ron on the end. This is Ron's beautiful airplane, and as Connie said, he's responsible for a good bit of what we have here, the Quonset hut and what have you. And we'll get to talk a little bit later about his museum. And first of all, I'd like to, Colonel Anderson Jr. here. Why aren't you Clarence Jr.? Why are you called Jim?
That's a pretty interesting story. I didn't learn who I was named after until I was almost 50 years old. I think it was very typical of the World War II generation. My father never really talked much about the war. My sister and I knew he had shot down some airplanes, and I remember playing in his World War II leather helmet when I was a little kid, but I didn't really know that much. So when he sent me the manuscript from the book, I learned that I was named after 2 pilots that my father flew with in the war that were killed. James Browning from Kansas and Eddie Simpson from New Jersey. Both great guys. Jim Browning really didn't have to be there. He was on his second tour, end of the war, and he was killed in a mid-air collision with a German jet, Me-262. And I was very, very fortunate. About 3 years ago, they found pieces of his crash site, and I was hiking in Switzerland, and 2 German policemen that found it contacted me, and I was able to go up near Frankfurt and visit the crash site and get pieces for my father, and I made a shadow box for him. Eddie Simpson had to bail out over France just after D-Day, and he went with the French underground, and he was doing real well, but then the Germans discovered where the French underground camp was, and he was in a convoy trying to escape the Germans who were chasing him. He was in the last vehicle, and the Germans were gaining on the convoy as they were trying to escape, and so they pulled over and stopped, and 2 French gentlemen jumped out with a machine gun to hold off the Germans, and Eddie jumped out with them, and he died there. And that wasn't really discovered until the 50s after the war. Nobody really knew, what had happened to Eddie. But that's how I got named.
Oh, yeah, and I forgot to say that Colonel Anderson here is he is an Academy graduate, Air Force Academy in 1969. He's flown the O2, the T-33, T-38, F-4E, and F-5, and he's currently retired again. He flew 20 years for Southwest, 16 and a half years and 20 years in the Air Force, and 9.5 years he taught at Arizona State. What did you teach?
I was in the aviation program.
He was in the aviation. I thought maybe he taught math or something like that. But you flew the O2 in Vietnam, and your dad was 105 wing commander in that area. Tell us about the time that you flew together.
Well, I was down at Ben Hoa Air Force Base in South Vietnam, and I was with the 9th Special Operations Squadron, and Dad was coming down from Tak Ly, Thailand to Saigon to sort of a wing commanders conference, and he called me and told me about that, and I said, well, why don't you come over and fly with me? And so he says, okay. So I flew over. I had a mission the next day. I flew over to Tan Son Nhut and picked him up. And as I recall, I think I had some problems starting the engine that he helped me with to get the thing running. And we went out and flew on about a 5-hour mission. And I brought him back to Ben Hoa. And everything was cool, except somebody took a picture of us. And all of a sudden it ended up in the PACAF newspaper. And then everybody found out about it except for my mother.
When did your mother find out?
I think she found out much later. we never told her.
Oh, and I'm sure she approved.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun that day, I guess. And yeah, it was really pretty something to have my father in the airplane with me on that day. So.
Was there anything else you'd like to ask your father here in public on television? Goes around the world?
No.
Well, that was quick. All right. Well, Ron, this is your airplane behind us here. Give us, well, first of all, it's your museum that you have in Granite Falls Museum, you and your family. Would you tell us something a little bit about your museum? It's not just about airplanes. Tell us about it.
Sure, Sam. We're out in Granite Falls, Minnesota, and we're called the Fagen Fighters World War II Museum. And it started with, we've owned this Mustang for 25 years, and people would stop by the hangar and say, hey, would you open up the hangar so we can see your airplane? So it kind of grew from there. And in 2012, we opened up a museum after adding airplanes to it and vehicles. And we're 120 miles west of Minneapolis in the middle of cornfields. And as they say, if you build it, they will come. Well, believe it or not, we get visitors now from all over the world. And it's grown into quite a busy museum. And we're the second busiest museum in the state of Minnesota. So we're proud of it. It's a family affair. Diane, my wife, right over there, and she keeps the things orderly, and she knows how to make things look good and the presentations, and that's all her. She's responsible for all that. She just lets Evan and I fly the airplanes, so that's kind of what that's all about.
Well, tell us some of the exhibits you have in there, other than the airplanes.
Sure. Well, we start off with one hangar, the trainer hangar, starting with the PTs, and then we also have one World War I Jenny there. And as we say when people visit the museum, if the tires are on the ground, whether it's a World War II vehicle or an airplane, it either drives or flies. And that's the case with most of the museum. We have a Waco glider, full-grown or full-size Waco glider, troop glider that does not fly, a trainer glider, and then we have an ME-109 that hangs from the ceiling. So everything is capable of running or flying or whatever, and that's the way we keep it. We have a Normandy invasion display with the Higgins boat, and it has these troops coming off the Higgins boat, bronze statues, and my dad was with the 4th Infantry Division, and he was in the first wave at Utah Beach, And I don't know if my dad was the last guy off the Higgins boat, but we made him the first guy off the Higgins boat. And so it's a very dramatic scene, and we have real sand from Utah Beach around it, and hedgehogs and everything. So it's very nice to honor the people of the Normandy invasion. And then in the other hangar, we have a Holocaust exhibit with an original boxcar that was used to haul people to the concentration camps and or the Allied pilots and American pilots to the Stalags. And we have the European side and the Pacific side, and we try to represent everybody, and a WASP display. And so we keep adding displays every year and try to make it very comfortable and educational for everybody. And the big thing is Diane and Evan and Aaron are working very hard to bring a lot of youth to the museum and teach them what World War II was all about. Very important. That's what we really work on.
What are your hours of operation and your days you operate?
Sure, during the spring, summer, and fall, it's Tuesday 10 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday, and then we have winter hours that start in November, which is Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So we got air conditioning in the summer and we got heat in the winter, so you can come there and be comfortable.
Okay, corn right outside. Now tell us, that we won't get into the particulars of the P-51 because that's going to be covered tomorrow, but tell us about your airplane.
Okay, this is
and the restoration and
sure.
the paint job.
Yep, this Mustang, our family has owned for 25 years. We've flown it. Evan and I fly it, and Sandberg family actually purchased this airplane, and John Sandberg was killed in a Reno racer, and the estate had this Mustang, and then we procured it from the family. The history of this Mustang, it was delivered to the 8th Air Force in England, February of 1944, a D model Mustang. We have no idea, we've never been able to find out whoever flew it, but it was definitely in Europe. After the war, the Swedish went to Sweden to be part of their Air Force.
Okay.
And I don't remember how many years the Swedish
I'm sorry.
used the Mustangs in their military. Then from there it went to the Dominican Republic and their Air Force. Then it went back to the States, and Steve Hinton up in Chino restored it for the Sandberg family. Then we purchased it, and it's the only airplane that isn't restored with the guns and all. Everything in the museum is just the way it rolled off the assembly line. This one's kind of a nice traveling one. It's got autopilot, all the radios, so it's not exactly authentic on the inside, but it served us very well.
Thank you, sir. Bud, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your video.
Okay. We got our do-it-yourself presentation this morning. The film was supposed to be at the end of my talk, my short talk here. Okay, we got it. First of all, I'd like to introduce two people out here in the crowd. Jack Roush, would you raise your hand? Okay, and Jim Hagedorn, where are you? He probably took off.
There's no telling.
But I'm particularly indebted to these two guys that are flying two representations of my World War II aircraft, the old Crow. Jack has a B model and Jim has a D model, and they're parked out there in the Warbird area. If you guys want to see two sparkling examples of P-51 World War II fighters, go see them. Okay. What you're looking at on the screen there is young Bud Anderson. I was age 22 when that picture was taken, And I flew all of my combat, other than 1 or 2 missions, at age 22. And some people ask, where did that big smile come from? Well, I knew that when that picture was taken, I knew I was through combat and I was going to go home. What we were in World War II was young. There's no question about it. Age 22, I was probably right in the middle of the, age of the pilots. We had some 18, 19 years old, and some a little bit older than 20, 23, 22, 23. How did Bud Anderson get involved in this thing? I always wanted to fly. I can't remember when I didn't. It was goes back. I can remember as a child Lindbergh's flight across the Pacific solo. First time it had ever been done, and it was really a big deal. I think I was about 5 years old when that happened. So, growing up on a farm in California during the Depression and everything, I knew my folks didn't have money for me to go to college, so I looked up the requirements for flying in a military service. This was still peacetime. And I found out you had to be 22, you had to have 2 years of college, and you had to be physically fit and unmarried. So I found a junior college in Sacramento, California, that would meet those requirements. And as soon as I finished high school, I went there. The course I took was a technical course. It qualified me to be an aircraft mechanic. And the Sacramento Air Depot there in Sacramento was just building up. So eventually they hired our entire class. And before that, though, a very important thing happened to me. My second year of college, the government offered a flying course to young men. So for the price of $9.50 for an insurance policy for my parents, I got a private pilot's license. It was in a Piper Cub, and you got exactly 35 hours, and you either passed or failed. Today, the requirement for a private pilot is still 35 hours. However, the average time for a pilot now to be a private pilot is up around 70 hours. There's so much more regulations and things to that.
Still 9.5.
I say
Still 9.5.
yeah. And so I graduated. I'm a pilot. I didn't do much flying that summer, but I did take my dad up for a ride and a couple other things. And so we all went to work at the Sacramento Air Depot, and every guy in World War II knows where he was when Pearl Harbor happened, 7 December 1941. The Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor. And I can remember that we were working 24/7, and it was a Sunday I don't remember the time of day, but it was the foreman came around and he says, "Hey, you, Bud Anderson, go home and come back at midnight for the graveyard shift. The Japanese would just attack us at Pearl Harbor." Oh wow! Now we're involved. So I was still 19, and I had to wait one more month, January 13th, 1942, before I could sign up. And I went right there to the recruiting station at the Sacramento Air Depot and raised my right hand a few days later, and I was gone. I went off to the normal training it had in those days, primary, basic, and advanced. And I'm not going to go into detail about that because I want to shorten up this talk. But I finally got my wings at Luke Field in Arizona, still an active Air Force base today. 29 September 1942, got my commission, second lieutenant, and my wings. And somewhere in there, I always wanted to be a fighter pilot. Not sure where that came from. Probably watching the newsreels of the Battle of Britain. And but on the other hand, I thought, you know, if I was in that airplane by myself, just me in that airplane, I would be responsible for everything. I'd be the pilot, the navigator, the bombardier, the gunner, the radio man. And I thought that would be an easier way to take care of my body during World War II. On the other hand, I thought the fighters were cooler than the bombers. So those days we needed pilots everywhere, you know, instructors, fighter pilots, bomber pilots, you name it. We had a shortage. We were trying to build our Army Air Corps. We didn't have a U.S. Air Force in those days. Up to from almost zero to 225,000 pilots as fast as possible, and don't let safety get in the way of progress. One of the sad statistics of World War II, I think, is the fact that we killed more of our own pilots in training than we did in combat. So my first duty assignment was in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I went to Hamilton Field, but with the duty station at the Oakland Municipal Airport. And I flew the P-39 Air Cobras. We transferred, what the deal was, you were supposed to go to this fighter pilot replacement training group and get checked out in a fighter. And it took about 3 months, and then you'd go someplace in the world and join a real fighter squadron. So my turn came up to go, and they said, "Oh, wait a minute, you, Bud Anderson, you're not going right now. You're going to a brand new fighter group that's being activated for World War II." Wow, I didn't realize the importance of this, but it was going to give me another training cycle. We were going to train this fighter group and then go overseas as a fighter group. And it would be good for promotion because I'd be on the ground floor, and it'd be good because I'd be one of the leaders and at least a flight commander, and that be in a position where you're supposed to get everybody involved in the fight. So we trained around, went to Tonopah, Nevada, came back to California, and made a couple more hops, and then went to Lander, Wyoming for our final training. And then we jumped in a troop train and headed for New York. Now we wondered where we would go in those, because we're flying the P-39s still. And where were they? They were in the South Pacific, or they were in North Africa. So I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between getting on that troop train, getting on the biggest ocean liner in the world, and heading for England, we found out that we're going to get the brand new P-51 Bravo. The P-51 Bravo was the one with the Merlin engine in it. Now, we had heard about P-51s, but we had not even seen one, let alone fly one. And there's one firing up right over there. I think you can probably hear it. And so how did we get checked out? We sent a guy up to the depot where they were being offloaded, and found a crew chief to tell you how to start it, brought it back home to our base, and then checked out the next guy. It sounds like a lousy way to do it. Well, it probably was, but we didn't even have flight manuals for the airplane. But we had quite a bit of fighter experience, and so it really wasn't as bad as you might think. And then we got in the P-51, and we found out it was so much better than the P-39 that we were delighted and not complaining one bit. And I got another break because the group commander came to us and said, "Hey, Bud, you're going to go to the Royal Air Force Central Fighter Gunnery School. You take a Mustang with you and fly it in the course instead of the Spitfire." So I got 35 hours in the Mustang before combat. And by that time, I had about 900 hours of total time. So I was fairly experienced before combat. I'm trying to look at the screen back there. Let's flip up another slide. Sound of freedom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you couldn't have planned that any better, could you?
Yeah. There's the B model up there now, and there's a exact replica of that sitting over there in the Warbird area. Next slide, please. These are just kind of pretty pictures. We got, I guess it was around February of 1944 that we started flying combat as a unit. And we did that by sending our flight leaders to the 357th, 54th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Group, and got our flight leaders 1 or 2 missions. And then the whole group then got involved in combat. I need to tell you about some of the let's have another slide. Pretty pictures, I think.
We want to get some question and answers in here also toward the
Okay.
end here. Okay, whenever you're ready.
This is a pretty picture here of contrails. Everybody knows what contrails are. And I gave this talk at Fresno, and I said, you know, I think if you'd been on the ground and you saw 1,000 bombers and maybe almost 1,000 fighters accompany them go deep into Germany and back, it had to be pretty intimidating, I think. And after I finished the talk, a little gray-haired German lady came up in front to talk to me, and she said, you know, we weren't worried about those big white things up there. We were worried about all that stuff that we were shooting up at you. When it exploded, it had to come back down. I never thought about that. But, you know, I'll tell you what, the American bombers, to do what we had to do, was to fly to in daylight, in formation, in huge formations. And when they'd go to the target, they had to fly straight and level for so many minutes to get accurate bombs using the Norden bomb sight. And of course, that was perfect for the guns at the ground. They could track them very accurately and fire. And they would, one group of bombers would go over the target and they'd almost leave a black cumulus cloud there. And here comes the second bunch. It's got to go right through that same cloud. And those guys had a lot of guts, and they took tremendous losses from the ground flak. And they took a tremendous loss from the German fighters. When we first got over there, the 8th Air Force, the ones that had the big bombers, thought that they could go into England in this large formations, and they could always get through and fight their way in and fight their way out. We called it the Flying Fortress. Well, they thought they could go through, get in and blow up the German war-making capability, and the troops could just walk in. Well, they forgot to tell the Luftwaffe about it. And the Luftwaffe was taking tremendous losses. until at a point in 1943 they halted, and then they decided, look, we got to use fighters. We had fighters over there, P-38s and P-47s, but they couldn't go the distance that the bombers wanted to go. Well, we got the Mustang over there. The Pioneer Group was there for the invasion of Europe and the ground support. So they said, let's use that P-51 and see how it could do. Well, it was so wildly successful that the 8th Air Force then demanded that they get P-51s. And we were the next unit to get the Mustang, so we were the first P-51 unit in the 8th Air Force. And that meant Bud Anderson would be flying escort for primarily the entire war. So there's one thing I want to tell you about. When we first got over there, the 8th Air Force told us how to escort, and we were supposed to stay close to us. They wanted us to stay there, fly around them, under them, and over them. And when the enemy came in, they wanted us to drive them away and come back. And we could go through 18,000 feet chasing them, but then if we hadn't shot them down, I had to break it off and come back up. Well, it wasn't the best way in the world to do it, but that's what we did. Then the spring of 1944 was very critical because the invasion of Europe was scheduled for June. And we had to defeat the Luftwaffe before we could conduct this invasion of Europe. So we weren't doing a very good job of it. The Army Air Corps' concept was that you go back and blow up the factories and the fuel and critical things to flying. But the Luftwaffe was still very, very potent in the start of 1944. And there's two significant things happened that I think had a dramatic impact on the air war over Europe, and they defeated Germany. It was a change of command. General Jimmy Doolittle took over the 8th Air Force and the arrival of the Mustang at the same time. And what happened was, I didn't know this, I read it in General Doolittle's book after the war. He went down to visit the 8th Fighter Command. He walks in and he sees this sign over the door. It says the mission of the 8th Fighter Command is to bring the bombers back safely, something like that. He says, who put that up there? And General Kepner says, I don't know, it was here when I got here. So he says, well, take it down. The mission of the 8th Fighter Command is to destroy the Luftwaffe. So he took that restriction off the fighter pilots, and he said, from now on, you fighter pilots, when you engage the enemy, you take them to the ground and kill them. It was called Pursue and Destroy. And how we defeated the Luftwaffe was not the classic way of blowing them up on the ground. We killed their experienced pilots in aerial combat. The victories really soared during the spring of 44, and this allowed the invasion of Europe and the eventual downfall of Germany. and so we got the 4 Top Guns, the 367 fighter group up there. I'll introduce them really quick, left to right. Peterson, Carson, Johnny England, England Air Force Base. There's the guy he was named after, and a young Bud Anderson. And so I was going to show the film, but we showed the film first. So this kind of concludes my
We've got
Sam, I think we need, thank you, Colonel Anderson. Excuse me, Sam, for interrupting. Colonel Anderson and Jim Anderson, Ron Fagen, Sam Bass, thank you for being our moderator for this special program that we put together. Coming up in the next Warbirds in Review will be the Fairy Firefly. And we were going to take a few questions, but we all enjoyed hearing the story from Colonel Anderson anyway. So I think this will conclude our program. And we have coins that we would like to give out to all our veterans. And if you haven't picked up your veteran's hat, if you are a veteran, we have those available also. And Kyle normally does all this, but she's holding the umbrella. Didn't they all do a nice job? So thank you to and also the programs are available and for sale. They're around here. They are truly souvenir programs that can be kept. And Bud, you're telling me you're going to be signing books in the store in just a little tomorrow at 2:00. Bud will be in the Warbird merchandise. You can pick up one of his books. It is the very best World War II book out there. And here's Mary with our coins. So on the fly here, did I miss anything, guys? Okay, thank you all for attending.